The vantage point is the reward for the execution. You do not get the view without the climb. And that is worth saying plainly. If you want new opportunities to appear, you have to do the work that earns you the vantage point to see those opportunities.
Welcome to the Law Firm Owner Podcast, powered by Velocity Work. This is the work that creates velocity.
Welcome back to the Law Firm Owner Podcast. Today, we are talking about what happens when you hit a capacity ceiling or you notice a bottleneck. So let's dig in. Okay, so let's say you have good demand. The firm is moving. The team is busy. The plan is working. And then you hit a ceiling or you notice a bottleneck that's coming. Something in the business that can't hold more. Maybe intake cannot take more calls. Maybe a team member has more on their plate than one person can actually handle. It is important to have the right outlook in order to pick the solid path, the right path for you forward. What I mean by the right outlook is determining how to address the bottleneck or the constraint so that everything can flow as it should. And sometimes people want to reduce the input in order to solve the bottleneck or solve what they think is the problem. And that is essentially putting on the brakes instead of addressing the bottleneck itself, opening up capacity so that work can flow through in a healthy way and can affect the firm as a whole in positive ways. So instead of that, sometimes what I watch people do is accommodate the bottleneck. And accommodating a bottleneck is not a solution, it's a slowdown. Recently, I had a conversation with an owner about a newfound bottleneck in intake. The intake person, who is amazing, has a goal for a certain number of intakes per day. But there's a new opportunity for this person to develop a service line that would bring in revenue for the firm. There's a lot of excitement around this. Everybody's gung-ho. But that person doesn't have the bandwidth to work on that new service line while also handling the number of intakes that they're supposed to hit. Now, the number of intakes that they're supposed to hit, the legal team has capacity for that work flowing in. So intake becomes the bottleneck to things flowing properly in the firm if their focus is to do anything else other than that job. There isn't space for that team member to do more on top of what they are already carrying. What can be common for firms in this situation is to wonder, should we just reduce the number of intakes required from that position so that that team member can have the space in their day to develop this new service line? Seems reasonable, and I understand the instinct, but adjusting the input to accommodate a bottleneck is not the solution. Adjusting the throughput is not the solution. Adjusting the bottleneck to accommodate the flow is the solution, because downstream there is capacity to do that work. If they reduce the number of intakes, they're going to be reducing the number of matters opened in the firm. That affects top-line revenue. It affects producer capacity, which means producer multiples will be lower than they should be. And your people cost is effectively higher because you have the same team cost with lower than necessary revenue coming in. Now, if you address the bottleneck so that the intake can come through as it should, while the service line that we want to develop is being developed, yes, that requires an investment. Technology, people, process, in this case, it's a hire. So yes, people cost goes up initially, but adding this person allows the number of intakes that the legal team can handle to actually flow through to them, which means top-line revenue goals stay on track. The people cost may tick up a small percentage in the short term and then come back down once that new service line is creating the revenue that the current intake person needs the space to build out. So, should we reduce intake expectations? Should we slow down the sales? Should we pause the new service line? Just wait till things calm down and there's more space for that, or wait till at some point in the future? Listen, I could understand why an owner's mind goes to these questions first, and it usually stems from fear. This shows up differently for different owners, but no one is immune to some level of it. And another way to say it instead of fear, if that doesn't resonate, it's owners having varying levels of risk tolerance. But the truth is, there are situations that require you to have a broader view of the business. And when you have that broader view, you realize that the bigger risk is actually doing the thing you initially felt compelled to do. The bigger risk is to shrink instead of addressing the bottleneck so that expansion can happen, so that flow can happen. And when things are flowing well through the business, that is reflected in the data. This is when your top line revenue can expand, but more importantly, your profit margin can expand because your producer multiples are where they should be and your people cost is where it should be. This is what happens when you ensure good flow into and throughout the firm. You address the bottleneck, not to shut off the flow to accommodate a bottleneck. There's a concept from Eliyahu Goldratt's book. It's called The Goal. And this concept that's in the goal is useful here. Goldratt teaches that every system has a constraint. The constraint is the part of the system that determines the output of the whole system. In a law firm, the constraint might be intake. It might be sales. It might be legal production. It might be the owner. It might be cash. It might be a team member who has become the only person who knows how to do a critical thing in the business. But there is always something that determines how much good work can move through the business, move through the system. There will always be a constraint. And that's not a sign that something is wrong with your business. It is the nature of any system. Goldratt's argument is that at any given point, something is the limiting factor. You address it, flow improves, and eventually the next constraint appears. And you address that one too. The goal is not to reach a place where there are no more constraints. That place doesn't exist. The goal is to get good at identifying them, diagnosing them correctly, and making the right call on what to do about them. This is what allows a business to keep evolving. This is what it looks like to be a good steward of what you have built. So the question is never just, do we have a constraint? You always do. The question is, what kind of constraint is it and what should you do about it? When an owner sees a bottleneck, the instinct is often to relieve pressure by reducing demand, by reducing throughput. But reducing demand or throughput doesn't fix the squeeze. It accommodates it. So before you slow the business down, you need to diagnose what kind of constraint you're actually dealing with. With constraints, if the throughput is not the throughput you want because it's low quality or it's distractive what's coming in, then constrain it. If the leads coming through are low quality, for example, constrain until that is addressed. If the work is low profit margin or it's misaligned or it's distracting and not actually the kind of work that the firm wants more of, constrain it, that bottleneck, like leave that constraint until something is fixed upstream of that. If the volume of throughput is damaging quality, hurting client experience, if it's creating chaos in delivery or pulling the firm away from the business it is trying to become, then you should constrain it. That is strategic constraint. You are not constraining because you are overwhelmed and hoping the pressure goes away. You are constraining because the work should not enter the system in the first place. And that could be very smart. You tighten the front door, you narrow the criteria, you say no sooner, you protect margin and the team capacity and the health of the business. But that is different from constraining good demand because there is a constraint in the system in your firm that does affect the whole. And that's where owners start to get in trouble. Goldratt uses the phrase, elevate the constraint. To elevate the constraint means to invest resources, time and or money, to increase the capacity of the part of the business that is limiting good throughput. That is it. That is what elevating the constraint is. So if one part of the firm is limiting the amount of good work the business can take in, it can produce, and it can deliver, elevating the constraint means you stop working around that limitation and you actually increase its capacity. Elevating could mean hiring another person. It could mean moving the team member out of the wrong seat or training someone to take over part of that function. It could mean improving the process or adding technology. It might mean removing some of the low value tasks from the bottleneck so that the person or function that is doing that work that matters, that's the only work that they're doing is the work that matters. It could mean changing who owns a decision, but here is what elevating is not. Elevating is not asking the intake person to just do more. It is not asking your legal team to be more efficient while they're already flagging that they are maxed out. It is not telling the owner or having you work more nights and weekends again. It is not lowering the goal and pretending that the problem went away. Elevating means making a structural change so the constraint can handle more of the right work. So circling back to the example that I shared at the beginning, at the top of the episode, the intake person is strong. They know the clients. They know the business. And through the work the firm has been doing, it became clear that they were the right person to build and run a new service line. That is genuinely exciting. A team member growing into something bigger. But here are the questions that have to be asked. Is the demand currently flowing through intake good demand? Is it the work the firm actually wants? And can the firm do the work? Does it have the capacity to actually fulfill the work? And in this case, yes, the legal team has capacity. The leads are good. The work is aligned. The intake volume that has been set as a goal exists because the firm can handle it and should be pursuing it. So when the question becomes, do we reduce the intake goal so that the intake person has the bandwidth for the new service line or to create that new service line? The framework answers that clearly. This is not a situation to constrain. The work should be entering the system. This is a situation to elevate the constraint, which means the answer is not to lower the front door goal. The answer is to build capacity into intake so that the volume continues to flow and so that this person has room also to build what the firm needs them to build with this new service line. And in this case, that means a hire. And I know what comes up when I say that. Well, then people cost goes up before the return is fully visible. But the hiring process, it takes time. Training takes time. Getting someone productive takes time. And if you wait until the pain is loud enough that you finally feel so ready, you are already behind. The investment is not the risk. The real risk, and this is where having a broader view really matters, a broader view of your firm. The real risk is reducing good intake, suppressing producer capacity, and then shrinking your way through a moment in your firm that was calling for growth. Here is the simplest way to think about it. Constrain when the work should not be entering the system. Elevate when the work should enter the system, but the system isn't built to handle it yet. That's the decision rule. And it applies whether the bottleneck is intake, whether it's legal production, it's the owner, it's a key team member, it can exist anywhere. If the constraint is protecting the firm from bad work, keep the constraint. And then you have some issues to fix, right, or to address. Maybe even tighten the constraint. If the constraint is blocking good work, you need to elevate the constraint. The question is, are we at capacity with the work we actually want? And if yes, the answer is usually not to shrink. The answer is to elevate. Now, here's a quick aside that feels important to mention. This opportunity that I'm referencing here with the client I was talking to, because it is an exciting opportunity. That opportunity was not obvious a few months ago. At the last strategic planning retreat, this owner was not sitting there saying, we need to move this intake person into a new revenue producing role and build capacity underneath her. That was not the plan. But they made a plan and they honored the plan. They executed. And because they executed, they got a better vantage point. That is one of the most underappreciated byproducts of following all the way through on execution of the plans that were made. This opportunity did not just appear. This opportunity was earned. They made a plan, and then, and this is part that matters, they actually did it. They did not get pulled away by the next shiny thing. They did not let important, but not right now, ideas crowd out what they'd already committed to. They followed through on the work, even when other things were competing for their attention. And that is harder than it sounds. It's one of the things that owners struggle with the most. And it is one of the most valuable things that comes out of the planning work that we do with clients. There is accountability to actually do what you said you would do. Because here is what is true. You cannot see what this owner can now see without having done what they did to get here. The vantage point is the reward for the execution. You do not get the view without the climb. So, this opportunity, this natural next step for the firm, this growth that should happen, it would not have surfaced had they not fully executed and fully completed the commitments that they made in terms of what they were going to get done in that quarter. It would not have been visible. And that is worth saying plainly. If you want new opportunities to appear, you have to do the work that earns you the vantage point to see those opportunities. And in this case, what execution revealed was a constraint. And now the owner has some clear decisions to make around elevating it. When your firm hits a capacity ceiling, do not jump straight to lowering the goal or expectations. The goal is not to keep the firm comfy. The goal is to increase profitable throughput without breaking the system. So do not use a constraint as a substitute for a capacity decision. The ceiling is telling you something, and your job is to figure out what it is telling you. If the work should not enter the system, you need to constrain it or squeeze it even further. If the work should enter the system, build the capacity to handle it. That is how you move from reacting to pressure to actually leading the business.
Before you go, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd like to hear more on this topic, let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Owner Podcast. If you're ready to get clearer on your vision, data, and mindset, then head over to velocitywork.com where you can plug in to quarterly strategic planning with accountability and coaching in between. This is the work that creates velocity.